Hello, everybody. We are back with GPS Live for Friday, April 21st, 2023. I am Tristan Morris.
And I'm Trace Hollifield.
And Jonathan is out again this week, but we're expecting him back soon. So Trace is filling in. Trace, so much has happened since the last time that we had you on here.
I know it's only been a few weeks too.
Yeah. But we're glad to have you back. Thanks for jumping in with us on the last minute here. But we got some interesting stuff going on. But have you been, man?
Oh, I've been fantastic. This last couple weeks have been incredibly busy. A lot of activity going on. We've seen some new tech hit the field, which is solving some problems for folks, and they're excited to get demos going. And one of the things I know we're going to be talking about later, but when you're getting into the cloud world, there's some API tech that's as easy to stand up. You get a proof of concept running in 15, 20 minutes.
Nice.
Not like the days of old where it give me a couple weeks to bring in equipment and plug it in. However, that also means there's opportunity for bad guys to do the same thing.
There absolutely is. Yeah, I mean, we can go ahead and jump into things. Before we get started, we do need to make it clear that the views and opinions expressed by Trace and myself are our own and do not necessarily affect the official opinions of GuidePoint Security. We're just two dudes talking about cybersecurity stuff, some interesting stories that we found from the week. Actually, we could change things up a little bit. We could go ahead and do that story if the one I'm thinking of is correct here. We could do that one first since you've got some thoughts on it.
Yeah, sure.
All right, cool.
Let's pull it up.
So our first story then, what we're gonna jump into, is this the one you were thinking of? The exposed? Yep.
Well, exactly.
So this one comes to us from Security Week. It's a pretty interesting story. So enterprises exposed to hacker attacks due to failure to wipe discarded routers. That is the title of the story. You can go find it on Security Week. It was just posted on April 19th, so just a couple days ago. This one's I don't know. It was weird to me when I first saw it because I was like, man, who's going around and getting access to stuff and finding this stuff? But a company acquired some secondhand routers, 18 secondhand enterprise routers from places like Cisco, Fortinet, Juniper Networks. Those were the manufacturers of the routers. None of this is related to them. This is not like a fault of those companies. It's just the manufacturers of the routers that were acquired. But they found that on a good number of these devices, there were still old configuration files and information from the organizations that had owned them previously that would have allowed them basically free and clear open access to anything if they were to use that info to get back at that organization. The list of previous owners of these routers included a lot of high-level companies, including some multinational tech companies, telecom firms, more than 10,000 employees, $1 billion in revenue. Like these are not small. These are not small fish.
Oh no! What happens in organizations like this? They usually have a refresh cycle of anywhere from 3 to 5 years. It just depends on the organization, where they're going to go through and say, hey, this gear has been running 24/7. It's time to replace it. It's time to do an upgrade. And what are they doing with the configs that are on there? And this is the part that a lot of people aren't familiar with. It's not just swap a box, put the new one in and go, but the old one still has a lot of good data. It has IP, it has route tables, it has SNMP strings, it's got user accounts on some of these things. So if that information gets out, could it still be live in the network? The answer is yes, right? So this destruction or disposal process has to include wiping the drive. And there are organizations that will do a certificate of destruction. Hey, I've wiped the thing. I've taken a magnet to it. I've deleted everything. I've run over with the steamroller, whatever that says it's gone. You don't have a risk here. But if that doesn't happen, right, this information is still very viable. And I think that's what happened here in this article. It was a little sad to say, hey, we got 18 devices, only 5 of them were properly wiped, right? So your 30% ratio, that means that 60+% not getting the treatment that it deserves. It's easy, low-hanging fruit. This is an electronic version of dumpster diving, right?
Yeah.
Give me the configs.
And it's interesting too, because we had just recently talked about a vulnerability in some routers that essentially allowed I don't know if you caught this episode, but the vulnerability that was present allowed anyone to basically send to spoof a MAC address and send a sleep signal to the router to say like, hey, this device is entering a low power state. It's going to sleep. Go ahead, buffer and queue anything that you were going to send to that device until it wakes up again. And then they could get to that router, and those packets themselves were actually completely unencrypted. So they could then go in there and say like, hey, use this MAC address, send a request for, wait till someone sends a request for banking information or something like that. Immediately send that sleep signal, let it buffer and queue all that information, and then just steal all that information and data because it was completely unencrypted in that queue. And so you layer that in with something like this, right? When these devices were taken off the network, how many devices in an organization with over 10,000 employees? Now, obviously, those 10,000 employees aren't all in the same building, right? But that means that you do have a headquarters that's massive. In that organization, how many devices were currently asleep and had potentially buffered and queued packets or something like that? Like how much stuff just kind of sits around on these routers that we're not thinking about, especially if the turnover for them is very quick and that data would still be accessible. But specifically what they called out in this article was, a lot of the stuff that you mentioned, but also like hashed root passwords, customer information and data, authentications for third-party vendors.
And don't forget even the simple things like a MAC address of the device. There are whitelists, right? 802.1x's of the world that says, hey, this thing's a legit person or a device that should be in this environment.
Yeah.
Did that get changed as well? I mean, there's very useful pieces of information.
Yeah, and I mean, even some stuff like internal assets that no one should know. Things like IP addresses and things for it, because it needs to be only internal, and you have an internal resource that you've made available to everyone by basically just writing your own DNS entry to say whenever they type this in, send them over to this internal thing over here. But you should only know that if you're in the company. That kind of stuff is extremely important. But what they call out in this article is that the type of information that's found on this stuff is usually only available to a very small select number of people at the organization. So for this to get out is a really huge security concern. And it reminds me of my time in the military when we had our secure communications equipment set up, and everyone had to know, like, you all had to know exactly when everyone was going to roll crypto. When is everyone changing over to the next set of cryptographic stuff? When is all this happening? And if you messed up one little thing, that's like hours and hours and hours of work to get it back online. And the reason that it makes me think of that is because, like you said, like, you're going to change out the equipment, but are you going to change out all the passwords that equipment ever touched? Are you going to change out all of the security measures that you would put in place around that and essentially rule crypto for your organization? At an organization this size, absolutely not. That would bring things grinding to a halt.
And people are lazy in general, right? So I got to change like SNMP string. That could be scripted. That can be automated. But if I got to do that on 10,000 devices, do I have time for that? When do I put that in the change window? How do I get that communicated out? I'll get to it later.
Yeah. And another really important thing that's brought up here is that two of the companies that would have been exposed by this information getting out there were actually managed services companies who managed other people's networks, and therefore their hardware would have all of the information that it needs to be able to connect to all of these networks that they manage to, or anything that hardware was used to connect to. So that it opens up that exposure even wider to all of their clients, anyone who might have touched that. Which brings us back to the thing that I think Jonathan and I have talked about quite a few times over the last few months, right? Like fully understanding and knowing exactly what you're getting into as soon as you bring a third party into the equation, whether that's using third party code in an application that you're building. Hey, exactly what is that code doing and what else is it depending on? Or when you're bringing in third-party partners to do things like manage security for you, manage networks, anything like that, understanding what their process is. It's an important question to ask. Hey, when you decommission your hardware that has my data on it, how do I know that is actually getting deleted?
And that risk is huge, right? Because that risk is, you have to make sure you have business level agreements around it and paper trails, chain of destruction. Here's my certificate that has been done. Because if something were to break out and that company that said they did it didn't, that could end that company, right?
Yeah.
So that third party, they've got a lot of risk. But inside the organization, the one who brought them in, they own that risk as well, regardless of who does the work, right?
Yeah. Yep, exactly. One of the impacted organizations representatives did talk to Security Week and said that they were shocked to learn this was out there because they had contracted a third party specialized disposal service, which just goes back to, hey, I mean, like, it'll be interesting to see now that this news is out there, which company suddenly blinks off the map. Right?
Well, they used to be around, but not anymore.
Yeah. It'll be really interesting to see if anyone, any players that anyone knows of, disappear suddenly, or suddenly file for Chapter 11,
or end up in a lawsuit, right?
Yeah, exactly. But it just does go back to the importance of understanding fully what's happening in your environment, not just while it's in your environment, but as it walks outside your environment, whether that be employees bringing laptops home, bringing information home to their insecure areas and their insecure networks, or your secure hardware and stuff leaving your organization.
That's right. Now, in the world of data, this is your intellectual property. This is what this falls into, and a lot of folks don't really connect the dots because they're thinking secret sauce to make the company work, right? Or PII, but this is very critical data.
Yeah, very critical data. But then I think that kind of brings us into our next story. We'll go back to the one that we were originally going to start with here. But talking about understanding who you're trusting and what you're bringing into your environment and what it has access to. A new bug that was recently revealed, and I believe has already been handled to a certain extent by Google. Right. But a new bug called Ghost Token was revealed. Excuse me. that basically allows, if it's introduced into your Google Cloud account, basically was allowing permanent ongoing access for any attacker and almost completely invisibly. So what this was a security vulnerability that leveraged Google Cloud Platform and Google's applications or the Google application market for putting things into your own environment, right? So if you look at something like Google Docs, grabbing plugins and things like that for Google Docs or for Gmail, these things that are available through Google's approved market. What this basically was just exploitation of what was supposed to be a good feature within the way that this worked. So essentially, you would grab one of these applications and approve it to use your Google account and approve it and give it access, and that would give it authentication. But then the developer would be able to say, "Hey, I'm going to delete this application. I don't want to manage it anymore." And what that would do is it would put it into a 30-day pause. So you could go back as a developer at any time and say, actually, I'm going to pick this one back up. But while it was in that pause, it would not uninstall it from any users, but it would hide it from them so that they wouldn't be able to see it. Instead of sending them a note saying, hey, this application's being deleted or whatever, it would just hide it. So you couldn't see that application within your Google account anymore, but you had given it a valid authentication token. And so when that developer then comes back and says, oh, I'm going to use this, it just grabs a new authentication token and it has free access to everything in your Google Cloud account again. So that's what they were doing. That's exactly how this was operating. It was operating on like a rolling 30-day window. Every 30 days, they would just grab a new authentication token and re-hide the application. And so you wouldn't be able to delete it, but there was a group out there that had, at any time they wanted, access to all of your data in your Google Cloud account.
Yep. And one of the things that we talk extensively about with a lot of different folks and customers is credential theft. This really kind of falls into that mindset of where are those creds being used, who's got access to them, how long are they alive for, right? And basically what now you've uncovered with this story is these credentials were good for 30 days hidden away. You didn't see them, but still active, still viable. And if someone can grab hold of them, you don't know. And that is like one of the key attack angles. And actually, we've seen an upshift moving away from malware is the main way, but let's get into credential theft because they're legit, right? And I can leverage them, get in, grab information, figure out how to do lateral movement, how to do privilege escalation. That's an easy way in. And that's where a lot of focus is now. Malware still legit. Don't downplay that, right? But they're looking for easy ways. And anything the devs do to make their life easy, hackers want a hold of, right? Because they can use it that easy way as well. But I mean, what's also crazy here, being a cloud platform, look what it opens the door to. Yeah. Everything in Google, not just email, but the drive, the files, the calendar, all that information is now exposed.
Your maps history, your location history, and
your GPS tracking, right?
Yep. Google Photos. I mean, and that's just looking at it from a personal account standpoint, right? When you're looking at like your Google Photos account, your Google Maps, like all of those things, that would allow someone to create some very convincing or very phishing campaigns or very threatening blackmail potentially, right? So like imagine if you suddenly you started getting texts about your current location or your locations over the last 30 days demanding payment for something, or else they were going to do something to you. Like that's incredibly scary. But this reaches out to corporate accounts as well.
Yep.
Right. Anyone in your organization who would have approved this application if you didn't have Google Apps locked down.
And think from a scamming perspective, right? Hey, I'm company X. I'm up and coming. Let me show you my app. All you got to do is OAuth into this thing from your device, and now they put a backdoor into your business. Yeah.
And it's it's going to receive that OAuth based on the privileges that it asks for. So when you approve it, we've all probably done this before when we're logging in with Google into another application or something like that. You get the little pop-up that says this thing would like access to all of these things, right? But
you also know that if you say no, it's over with. You don't really have.
You don't use it. You don't get. It's either you grant it or you don't get to use it. There's very few that give you any level of customization around that at all.
That granularity is missing. It's all or nothing. It's global, right?
Yep. So crafting that malicious application, all that it takes is putting it out there as hey, this is a productivity hack for you, right? In today's day and age, everyone's looking for ways that they can streamline their work and make things simpler, especially as a lot of people work from home. Right. They want their workday to be as simple as possible so they can get it done and go back to their lives. So all you got to do is build an application that says this is for productivity. And then it makes sense. Why is this asking for access to my calendar, my docs, my this, right?
Yeah.
You granted access to that and then they hide it away. And you might go, oh, where'd that thing that I downloaded go? I can't find it anymore. But because, your end user, your typical end users is not going to look much further than that. They can't find it anymore. It must be gone.
And the other thing too is most security organizations, they're all our security teams in business operations, right? They're trying to make sure they get visibility into this because the top three, Google, Microsoft, AWS, all of them are under constant attack. And for this specific reason, they'll get the most bang for the buck once they break into an environment like this. Look what all access they get to, all the information that just falls out at their fingertips, right? So these cloud companies, as much as I love them and the convenience factor, it also makes it easy for the attackers to really harvest out a lot of good intel.
Yeah. And, you know, this one is going back to a story that we talked about last week with Curtis. That was about the FBI's warning about juice jacking and plugging into public chargers, which, you know, Curtis and I kind of talked about, like, hey, this is the boogeyman of cybersecurity. Like, how many years have collectively have you and your friends all been involved in cybersecurity, and across all of that, how many times have you ever heard of an actual legitimate juice jacking? Right? It's a little too spray and pray. And it feels like this could be similar, right? You're just relying on whoever finds this application and downloads it before you throw it on pause and lose access to that stuff for 30 days and then re-up it. But if you just grab a snapshot of all of the basic information, account information for who has approved this application in the time that you have it running and active, it's not hard to filter out, here are actual businesses versus personal ones. Let me go look up these business domains and figure out which ones are going to be the juiciest, which ones are going to be ones to go after. That 30 days of invisible time where you're just sleeping in the background is a lot of time to plan, a lot of time to get your act together and jump back into that organization. And it's just that eternal battle, as the dark reading article that we're using or that we're referencing here calls out, right? They have a specific header for eternal battle of usability and security, which is something that you brought up right before we started, Trace, right? It's like this was originally intended to be a good feature.
Yeah.
That, hey, the application doesn't disappear the second you click delete. It's there for them to be able to bring it back. But also on the user end, we don't want to flood them with notifications every time an application goes on pause.
Exactly.
So we'll just hide it from them.
Exactly. We'll make this super convenient for the devs, right? But you leave that convenience factor for the bad guys as well.
Yeah.
Now the other thing I could imagine, right? I could imagine this being linked to, like, say, spear phishing, and you could say, "Hey, download this link and check out this app." That could be an attack vector as well.
Yeah, and you know, this is something that they call out. This was a core function, a core feature of Google Cloud Platform, and how it worked. This was not like an accident. It wasn't a mistake. This was done very intentionally, and it was a very nice feature. But you know, mitigation and patching moving forward. Obviously, mitigation if you're an organization, not allowing people to access these kinds of Google applications, right? Yeah. I know that if I go into Google Docs, as much as it might make my life easier when I'm writing something, to be able to have a plugin that will automatically grab things for me, or you know, correct mistakes or things like that, that I don't have access to that here at GuidePoint. They've locked that down entirely. So from a mitigation standpoint, just not allowing that. But from a patching standpoint, Google already rolled out a global patch fixing that issue by making sure that apps that are like in that pending deletion state don't just disappear. They're still visible and available under that user management screen. But they do call it the Google Workspace administrators should go looking for these kinds of things.
Yeah, there's two things to look for, right?
Two things to look for: applications whose client ID is the same as the display text field, and remove access if it appears like it could be a malicious app at all. And then inspecting OAuth log events in that audit and investigation feature within Google Workspace to find any kind of token activity for apps that could be malicious. So if you see some suspicious things in there, obviously no cybersecurity professional ever wants to hear, "Hey, here's 2 more things to check in your busy schedule." But you know, that's how this is going to work. And I don't think for this one there was necessarily active exploitation that was noted. This was more of a theoretical, hey, this could be happening. So it'll be interesting to see how Google moves forward with that as well. Are they going to do a large scale investigation to find these kinds of applications and notify people?
Yep, TBD, right? Because this all happened like this week.
But we're running short on time, so let's jump to our last story here. This one goes back to the early days of GPS Live. It harkens back to the feelings we had then. Medusa ransomware group, not to be confused with Medusa Locker. They have come up on our show before just a few weeks ago, but Medusa ransomware group is bragging about spreading the Bing and Cortana source code from Microsoft. So you might remember Medusa ransomware gang if you've been watching the show for a little bit and you've been a frequent viewer. A few weeks back, they published a video. They had taken over, I believe it was in Minneapolis.
Yep.
Minneapolis Public School District. They had ransomed them, and they released a video of just browsing through files that they had stolen from the school to try and get a little bit of extra leverage there, which is a really interesting thing to talk about now, just after the Q1 2023 Grit ransomware report came out. I talked to the guys about it pretty heavily as we were working on things, but specifically the Grit ransomware report for Q1 calls out the trend in the education sector of ransomware and how they're operating, but also there's a lengthy section in there talking about the rise of increasingly exploitative and coercive tactics within ransomware. So instead of just like going for that 1-2 combo where they're saying we encrypted your files and we've encrypted your files and we've stolen them, they're going into far more coercive tactics, like doing selective leaks and trying to manipulate media attention around attacks to tarnish the names of the places that they're hitting. But what Medusa has done here is saying that they have the source code for Bing and Cortana and they're leaking it, and that it still has why am I digital signatures? It still has the signatures for Microsoft.
I was going to say, they said it's about 37 gigs of intel, like of files, source code. So as I go digging through it, you're going to find hooks into like how everything is connected, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of the killer part.
Yeah. And things like signing certificates, digital signatures, things like that. Basically, they're saying like, hey, programmers, malicious actors, a lot of this stuff isn't going to be revoked yet, so you can use this to make your malware, your ransomware, anything that you're building look legit and look official by using these. And that's a pretty big thing. But for their part, Microsoft, I'm trying to find the exact quote here. Where was it? So this goes back to what I was saying earlier. This harkens back to Lapsus in the early days of GPS Live. That was the big crew, right? The big bravado of saying like, hey, look what we have, and just going out there and publishing it, and inviting other people to use it.
Well, after they published it, right, they got a lot of heat, and Lapis they were hunted down, and most of them turned out to be like late teenagers, right?
Yeah, right. They were just kids chasing clout, essentially. Those kids in that time that they were chasing clout potentially made more money than I will make in my entire life. Then they lost it all. But in March 2022, when Lapsus was claiming to have breached Microsoft and to have released these things, that was about 37 gigabytes of information. Microsoft confirmed that it had been compromised, but they also came out and said, hey, we don't rely on the secrecy of our code as a security measure. We write things to be secure from the beginning. And so, that's something that we talk about a lot is DevSecOps and from the very beginning, trying to build security into your applications. And so it's really impressive and bold, I would say, for Microsoft to say, we don't worry about this, like have the source. Like,
you've already got it. Big deal. Have fun with it.
We're secure. It's great. But it is interesting to see the overlap, I think, between the way that Medusa is acting as a new kind of startup ransomware group, compared to the way Lapsus was acting, which was a new startup threat group, and that kind of bravado that they're putting out there, and trying to establish a name for themselves, I think.
Yeah, I think that's to your point that the clout chasing is very popular right now. And also too the twist of what happens when the ransomware hits. There's some other weird ones out there where like two groups get in at the same time, and you got two different ransomwares to worry about, like double encryption type of stuff.
Yep.
So the techniques are evolving, and another reason why it's critical to make sure you have proper backups in place. Because if they bypass your EDR, you don't have EDR in place, you don't have their mechanisms for protection. The only thing you can do is revert to backups. That's the only thing that's going to save you from, well, paying a ransom.
Yep. And I'm actually just in the last minute here, I'm going to pop open the Grit ransomware report itself.
Oh, yeah, good idea.
I just want to see, I'm taking a quick look here to see if we have Medusa tracked in those,
on the list.
On the list. Yeah, actually, Medusa made it into the top 10 ransomware threat actors for Q1. In large part, I think due to those attacks, like Minneapolis Public Schools and a few other organizations. They didn't crack the top 6, which we do have a specific graph for in here, but they did make it into that top 10 list. They are number 9 on our list, with most of their activity taking place in February and March. So they are actually all their activity taking place in February and March. But then specifically, we call out, like I was saying earlier, about the education side itself. Medusa was a relatively young threat group, responsible for 6% of the attacks against the education sector, the education vertical. Vice Society was the largest with 27%. Lockbit, who is by far the most prolific ransomware group out there, was at 20%. But yeah, Medusa claimed 6% of those victims. So they are making waves, and it is kind of odd that they would, I think, branch out and try and make a name with this Microsoft stuff when they're already making waves elsewhere.
Exactly.
All right. Well, that brings us to the top of the hour. So Trace, thank you so much for joining me again, man.
Well, thanks for having me on. It was a great conversation, buddy.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you've been watching us live, thank you so much for your time. If you caught us on demand, we appreciate that. Go ahead and leave some comments. We go back and take a look at those and see if we should revisit any conversations in the future. But until next week, have been and will continue to be Tristan Morris
and Trace Hollifield.
And we will talk to you next time.